International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. If you've been following the past few shows, you may have spotted a theme emerging that I pointed to some 4 shows back, namely the idea that NDEs are not only windows into heaven, but mirrors to reflect the meaning of what we call reality here on Earth. At that time, I spoke about time as a dimension created like a laboratory tool for us to study who, what, and where we are. And then the next show, I spent talking with my wife, Charlene, about the theology of her favorite film trilogy, the Matrix movies. As you'll probably recall, the Matrix picked up where Terminator left off. The machines, AI, artificial intelligence, have won the war and use human bodies as energizer bunnies tapping into our collective consciousness while they project a fake reality based on life in 20th century America into our heads. It's a virtual reality life called the Matrix that has no bearing on the real state of being. On last week's show, Raymond Moody, the father of 20th century near-death experience studies, speculated on the fact that experiencers almost always state that language is inadequate to describe the near-death experience. He is developing the notion that a so-called nonsense language, the sort of illogical language found in parts of Lewis Carroll's Alice books or in children's jump rope chants or in the religious practices of speaking in tongues, may be a way of training our minds to open to a larger understanding of the NDE. Meanwhile, however, artificial intelligence advances by leaps and bounds. Math has already tackled such seemingly illogical confrontations as E equals MC squared and compared to quantum physics. Will there be a scientific means for reaching into the spiritual dimension? And if so, could it damage human empathy and love for God that Moody's language approach might better preserve? So returning to discuss this all with me and more is my wife, Charlene Kent, who holds a Master of Theology Studies degree from Bangor Seminary. Charlene, welcome back to NDE Radio.
Thanks.
I thought about opening this whole thing with the song Get Me Jesus on the Line. In my write-up for this show, I said we continue the discussion from 3 shows ago and 4 shows ago, really, on how NDEs mirror this reality. The Matrix reality is a reference to ideas from Yuvai Noah Harari's recent book, Homo Deus, and Dr. Raymond Moody's search for a nonsense language to describe NDEs from last week's show. And we're going to compare those to science's current obsession with data flows. So can we do all this in half an hour?
Well, we probably can, because the whole thing I find very confusing. The Homo Deus book, I don't totally know in the end what world he postulates, but
Well, let's start with.
It just sounds, like one of those sci-fi things where it's all just gotten a little out of hand. But so I don't, because he doesn't take into account the things, and which we didn't discuss too in the Matrix, which was stuff that you can find like in Psalm 139, which says that all the days of your life have already been written in the book, and also the Valmiki story from the Ramayana, where Siri, the wife of Ram, is killed, commits suicide because all of the people around him, his counselors, keep making her go through trials because basically she's a woman and is unclean, and she's been carried away by a demon occasionally, that sort of thing. And they keep making her go through these horrible trials to prove her purity. And finally she's had enough, so she jumps into the Ganges, who is her mother, because these are all and demigods. So he's in despair, and he wants to kill himself too. And Valmiki says to him, who's the writer of his story, he said, "No, I'm sorry, Rama, you cannot die now, because, see, all of the story I still have in the book." Which means it's, again, the same idea that in reality there is no time.
Right, and I don't think
stories, the information we're telling ourselves, which is what the book Homo Deus is based on. It's sort of hard. I mean, we can't even comprehend what that means in a way. So you go ahead and say what you're saying.
Well, I was going to say it seems to be intrinsically tied to the notion of that time is a valid dimension, which to experiencers, it's not necessarily. I wanted to start with the first line of "Get Me Jesus" on the line.
Okay.
It begins, "Operator, give me information," which is perfect for this discussion.
Yep.
Information, give me long distance. Long distance, give me heaven. And then, operator, information, give me Jesus on the line. I had asked you the other day what you thought happens when we die, and you said, or where we go when we die, and you said you didn't think we went anywhere at all. Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, no, what we're talking about was a heaven as a place.
Right.
And the idea, too, like in most scriptures, I think you have the people ascend somewhere, or when they die, they descend somewhere, and it's like awareness thing. But I said that just like time, these are all dimensions that in reality don't exist. The fourth, it's a multidimensional universe that overlay this very tiny bit of it that we perceive. So I said that heaven isn't anywhere. Heaven is a state of perception, or if, and like in this book Homo Deus, he would describe it as an experience. And then what we're doing is, as the narrator self, he has these two selves. The narrator self is describing to us the meaning of that and trying to put together what we experience as the reality that there is another sense, and we call it place or awareness, that we go to, because I'll tell you, the mystics talk, and when you talk, they usually talk about coming up against hitting a wall. I can't remember his name, starts with an H, was a mystic who talked about that in meditation or in trying to approach reality, in the end you always like bash up against the wall. And I always thought this way as sort of the force fields of Star Trek, those invisible force fields. And so our perceptions eventually bounce up against walls with that, and again, using the book Homo Deus, our current algorithms or programming don't allow us to explore. Or all we do is we have a sense of this. Now, he would say that sense of this is just a way of explaining stuff we already don't understand. That's what science says, and then we make up stories about other worlds or heavens or whatever to assuage our curiosity or our needs and all that sort of thing. But I sort of had experience. I've had experiences of it occasionally myself. It's like when our first Sammy died, Sam, and
our dog. When
when he died, I really, literally, almost felt like there was a wall where he was like there, but I was hitting a wall.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like a brick. This thing felt like a brick wall, solid wall. This was more like literally like those kind of dome kind of walls where you don't see it until you hit it, kind of thing. And I just sort of think it's that all the days of our lives are already written. It throws our understanding of what free will is and where we're making decisions and all this thing up in the air. And that's the wall we're at, is like the definite beginning and end all of the meaning of what's going on. So anyway.
Well, okay, so there's Raymond Moody trying to invent a language that can explain for those people who've crossed through that wall or looked through that wall what they saw on the other side. And on the other hand, we have Homo Deus, who is, I guess he's basically an atheist.
Oh, he is definitely an atheist.
and who is saying that basically there are two. Well, one of the things he says in this book is that there are two parts of our brain. One is experiential and one is narrative, and that we always go to the narrative because that defines ourselves. In other words, he said, if you were given the choice between going to Las Vegas and having some sort of amazing, overwhelming experience or going to Jamestown and learning some sort of boring history from that experience, but you could narrate it, and the experience in Las Vegas was going to vanish the moment you had it. Which would you choose? People always, or almost always, opt for the
memory
experience that they can remember, that they can commit to their narrative definition of their lives.
Right.
And also there's this whole thing about the narrative that we go through as a life review when we cross over to the other side. That this narrative thing is very important, but not necessarily to Harari, the author of this Homo Deus book.
Right. Well, he wouldn't have any kind of crossing over to another side.
No.
He would talk about this as some kind of brain chemistry, an algorithm that got started when, because your body's shutting down. And, yeah. Well, you and I've sort of discussed this, too, with me when I was doing some research into how to put the near-death experience into context in Christian theology. And you found in Catholicism and in Orthodoxy, there were all these in-between places that are between where you're not alive and you're not dead kind of thing,
mm-hmm.
or you're not, your consciousness is different. Let's just say that. And then we were also talking about how in Buddhism, anything you experience is always a reflection of yourself. You can't experience anything but that what you already are yourself. So, again, for me, and since there is no time, that would mean that the near-death experiencer is already in their body again. Do you see what I'm saying? It's always so hard to say already and now because that's not what happens. It's that in a sense they are experiencing something that's a reflection of their consciousness. Not that it's not true and that it's not real, but that we don't know if it's some kind of in between, or because if there is no time, they're not in their near. The near-death experience is also part of their future life.
Now you say that when you die, you don't really go anywhere, and yet it may be our urge to have a narration that when people come back from a near-death experience, they often describe it as a journey down a tunnel, out into space,
mm-hmm.
Into the light, across a field. There's travel and time implied in the description, which may be part of which Raymond Moody wants to overcome in his nonsense language, but I'm not sure about that. I didn't talk to him about that. But maybe we are just where we are.
Well,
as you say, it's a timeless event.
Right. In that book, The Homo Deus, he discussed this, and you and both of us, we've experienced simulators, and now they have even more advanced visual reality things, virtual reality things. And you put a helmet on, they can make you totally experience things right while you're sitting, and you feel like you're going down tunnels and in holes and everything. I'm not saying that's what the near-death experience is. I'm just saying that it's an experience that's within yourself of something without that's real, but that it doesn't have to be in another place. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's part. So the tunnel is you are the tunnel, and you're approaching the oneness or the light, but that's always around us.
And then the question is, who is generating this virtual reality experience that you're undergoing? Is this,
right.
Is this a guardian angel? Is this God, or is this your own soul that has pre-programmed what you will see when you die?
I mean, if I understand, like Rupert Sheldrake and or some sort of Eastern religion things, that they don't have an external kind of. Some of them do, of course, but the idea of God, what they have is the interlinking sense of consciousness, which we would call like the spiritual or whatever, or in Jung it was the collective unconsciousness of all humanity and all this sort of thing. But it's the thing that is, like Confucius would say, as above, so below. As Plato said the same thing. There's a place where things are what they are before they manifest here in the physical, but the physical is only only a manifestation of what is. So there is a place of tableness. I'm sitting at a table. There is a thing of tableness, but a table exists here for me. But that's because that's the way I experience tableness. And so consciousness is the word pre-spoken before it manifests things. Let's say if we took it the creation story. So if there's a consciousness that we're all part of, and then what we are is not just in our heads, we're also outside of our heads. And this is Sheldrake's thing, is that we always feel like we're experiencing from an interior self, but in reality we're experiencing from an outer being too as well, a beingness. So we have this interior, we see it as an interior self, but we're really part of a universal consciousness. And so if using like the information guy, the Homo Deus, he would call like the web, right? The web is the thing that interlinks everything and is out there and eventually will be everything. That's right. his postulation. But pre his thought, and let's just always understand that people always explain the spiritual in terms of their latest technology. I just make clear, we used to be machines, now we're information data processing things. So that's how we look at ourselves.
And before that, there were demons, and
right.
and now now people talk about aliens who are actually manifesting technology. Well, we should maybe explain a little about Harari's book. That he claims that organisms are algorithms, that we are all kind of a flow of biologic information, and that if we that ultimately the goal, according to him, is to aspire to a total flow of information, that information is going to transcend Homo sapiens, and we are going to, if we master it, become like supermen or gods by the constantly expanding flow of information. Although to me it sounds more like we're all going to become ants building an anthill together.
Right. His first postulation is that a few of us become like gods and become enhanced human beings using the technology that the information systems have come up with. So like this helmet that can so clarify your mind that this woman wore, that she could complete tasks and with the helmet that she couldn't do without the helmet because it stilled her mind. So what he's saying is that that's one possibility, but that would only be the very wealthy or the very smart or whatever get to live in that world, and then everybody else will sort of probably die out. In the other world, he has where, and I really have time visualizing what's left after all of this, but that it only becomes an information system because data gathering and data accumulation and data sharing is the ultimate good. And in the end, you don't really need bodies or humans to do that. That these AIs will be. That's where that, and he sees that world as, I think, almost more possible than the enhanced human world. If anybody wants to see about the enhanced human world and the corporate takeover, they need to read William Gibson novels, because he really goes into this, and he talks about the merging of the human with the machine. And that's what the Matrix talks about. He does not, in this book, he doesn't talk about the merging. He says he talks about advanced humans, but he never talks about the linking of the AI with the human intelligence. It starts to supersede the human intelligence.
Right. We sort of all flow together as a stream of information.
And humans cease to be, basically.
The vision I get is that stream of numbers on the green screen coming down in the Matrix movie, which is just a picture of information flowing, even though it's all a lie because it's all the Matrix.
Right. What it reminded me of was 2001: A Space Odyssey, when you have the cubes, and when they touch the cubes, they get smarter. They make the next step. You go from ape to human, then you go from human to Jupiter space. But what's on the other side of Jupiter space and what's delivered these cubes is just streams and streams of light. And remember, the guy who wrote that was the guy who built the transistor and worked in the first computer scientist. So one of the first. So he saw everything as pure intelligence, and the universe was this. And when you say pure intelligence, if it's you start going to the sense of God as consciousness, and in the end, we always end up at the same place. Whether it's through science or through intuitive religious understandings, that you end up feeling in awe of this universe of intelligence. But in 2001, it was a race that had evolved to a place of pure intelligence, and they were manipulating humans to enter that world too. We don't really end up knowing who they are or what that's all about, but that's the premise of the book.
Harari talks about our evolving as a species from worshiping God to worshiping humanism, which is, he calls it a form of religion that worships humans instead of God, to worshiping data or data. Dataism, he calls it, and it's he defines it as the universe consists of data flows, and the value of any phenomenon or entity is determined by its contribution to data processing. And then he goes on and says, Dataism says that Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, a stock exchange bubble, or the flu virus are just three patterns of data flow that can be analyzed using the same basic concepts and tools. They give all scientists a common language and builds bridges over academic rifts and easily exports insights across disciplinary borders. So it's all information is important information. Talk a little about what he says about Facebook and all of that stuff.
Well, what is interesting about what you just said is that it offers insights. But he never really talks about what insights you get from looking at the pure digital information of Beethoven's Ninth and the flu virus. What you do learn is that they're both complex, they're both beautiful, they're both, but I don't know what insight you get. And that's the thing, is that when you break it all, everything down, I mean, it's pure reductionism, right? So if you get that, and this has been an argument with a lot of people, is that science ends up being like Dawkins and stuff. They get to the point where they're so reductionist and they end up turning their science into a religion, just like they always accuse people of having.
Well, what gets me about this thing is that people who have died and experienced suddenly they have the answer. Some people have said, suddenly I had the answer to every question I ever asked, ever wondered about,
that
I tapped into this consciousness, the Akashic record or the collective unconscious or the collective conscious or God, and the answer's already there. And Harari's talking about building a system that would provide all of the same information, but he doesn't. There's no suggestion of love. There's no suggestion of intelligence beyond information.
Right.
It's all just information. Seems like he's reinventing a wheel that has already been perfected.
Don't you think that maybe because people don't bring back the answers, by the way. I always know when you're listening to people that are channeling phony baloney stuff is because they give you all the answers to your questions. Because in the end, I think that what you find out is that there are no questions. And there are no answers. Do you see what I'm saying? Is that the questions are all just things that we, again, our blocked perception create here or wherever we are in the life that we're in, and that when you break through when you go through walls, the reality is that there is no question. In other words, when we die, we don't need to go up to St. Peter at the gate and say, well, why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why did this happen? Why? Because it's irrelevant at this point, because again, there is no time. There is no, we see it as sequential and cause and effect, but those things are, like in Matrix, there is no spoon kind of thing.
Right, but if there is no spoon, that means that the spoon is just a projection from within us.
Well, that's what Hinduism would say, I think, or Buddhism, yeah.
I think they go with this Maya, but that doesn't mean that it's not real, and it's not a real construct of something.
It's the way that we're experiencing the whole reality. We experience it in small bits. That's what he says in the book too, and other people say. We see the world as if it's a continuous flow. That's what our brain sees it as. But they found that what we're doing is we're really almost more like still cameras, where we're taking snapshots, and there are gaps. And that left side of your brain is putting the whole thing together so that when you interpret it, it looks like a flowing movie. But that's not the way we perceive it. We perceive it in bits and upside down. So, that's how the information is taken in through our sensory system, and then our brain puts it together into the story of reality that we see. And I think that what religions and this idea is that an overlying consciousness is what gives us meaning and allows us to put together the film. That we are putting together the film not alone by ourselves, but as an overarching consciousness with each other, with animals, with trees, with the universe, and that's how then we generate a reality that gives us meaning, or the reality that we're in, and then as our perceptions change, like from near death, or from meditation, or from, mystical breakthroughs, or from literally death, then then we get opened up to more of the whole of the reality of consciousness. And for the atheistic people, I think like Deepak Chopra, consciousness to him is the interweaving, interconnectedness of everything, and that does give meaning, and that's an evolving state in the universe. For theists, that consciousness is like Jesus said, God is not a spirit, God is spirit, that it's that consciousness, and that's the thing that generated everything, and is the original being, which then we can have a relationship with it or whatever, and with each other, and that gives us meaning. But see, this information system, like you were talking about, that you end up with just the internet run by a few technocrats and corporatists, in the end, if all you have is the data that's shared by everything, is it going to achieve that sense of consciousness? And he doesn't say that it does, and he doesn't think that it's necessarily important. That data and information in itself is important.
Right.
But
Harari says organisms are algorithms, and he says giraffes, tomatoes, and human beings are just different methods for processing data.
Right.
This is current scientific dogma. He says it's not just his idea, but this is what science is now accepting as true, and it's changing our world beyond recognition. But if that's true, then if there's no differentiation, and it's all just a flow of data, of different forms of data, but it's all just data, then it's hard to imagine building a narration out of that would be satisfying to humanity.
He does mention shamans and people that touch the mystical in other cultures. He's trying to figure out how people do perceive things. But isn't this the way that the people for centuries saw the world prior to the Industrial Revolution, and that we were all interconnected, we're all the same? There isn't in Native American you find your power animal, the thing that you are tied to nature with, and that we are all just different processing systems of the same information. Just using different words to say that that we're all part of the same Great Spirit, and that the Great Spirit is processing through us, and that we share it all together. I have no problem with what he's saying in that. I look at it this way: they're the four things that make up DNA. I don't know, was it ATC or something like that? And those are the things then that make up everything that's living, and it's all just different ways of combining them. That doesn't bother me.
That's true.
Yeah, it just doesn't. That doesn't affect. That's how the world that we live in, that we perceive, that's how it functions. That's how our bodies come into being, or whatever, or ourselves. But that doesn't mean it's the ultimate. It's only, again, a reflection of another prior consciousness that is manifesting as these things that then produce
Right. As Plato would say, there are shadows on the wall that we're observing at this point of a greater reality. Mm-hmm. Hey, we are out of time, Charlene. I
hope this hasn't been totally confusing and meaningless.
We'll go back and listen to it later and see.
I think we've successfully done the nonsense from last week. We've invented his nonsense language.
I'll have to ask Raymond if this is what he meant. Yeah. If the audience would like to listen again to this or any of our past shows, go to our website at nderadio.org. And for more information about the work of IANDS, check out that website, IANDS.org, and tune in next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.